How's it, my Orchids and Fynbos friends? Today I have another CareCollab video for you. Today's video will be focused on Neofinetia falcata or Vanda falcata. So stay tuned for some tips about these interesting little orchids. So we have a few channels participating in today's CareCollab and I'll display them on the screen now. Don't forget to check out the other channels and look at how they're growing their Neofinetias in their environment and their tips and tricks to these orchids. So Neofinetia falcata is quite an interesting little orchid and you can read up all about them online. In ancient times, these orchids were very important and very special to samurai warriors as well as royalty in Japan. Even to the point that when some people used to look at the orchids, they needed to wear a face mask so that they didn't impart any disease onto the orchids. It's fascinating how these things can become so precious to us. Following on from that, this specific orchid has quite an ironic story to it. As you can see, we have the remnants of the dead mother plant in the back here. This is one of the keikis, and then there was another keiki at the back end over there. So I potted this orchid up in the traditional style. So the traditional way of potting these orchids up is to pot them up in a clay pot with a ball of sphagnum moss wrapped around the roots. This is how they were traditionally kept in ancient times, and I decided to give it a go. In Cape Town at least, it's very difficult to get your hands on long strand sphagnum moss, so I had to do quite a bit of searching, but I eventually managed to sort through a bag of moss to get myself some long strand sphagnum moss. So this one was repotted in June last year, and subsequently to that, the area where I had placed the orchid wasn't ideal for the orchid. I had it actually in my bedroom, and we don't get any direct sunlight there in the window, so I suspect it got a fungal infection or something of the sort, and I immediately saw the mother plant starting to lose its leaves. I knew that I could try and save the keikis, but they had no roots at the time, so I had to just leave it on the plant and hope that the keikis actually survived. The one keiki did not. Obviously it was taken along with the mother plant, but the other keiki did survive. This took place around probably late winter, so about August last year. So this one's definitely pulled through, nothing wrong with it now, and it's doing pretty well actually. But for now it has one root that it's produced itself, this long root over here. So I'll probably repot it at a later stage, maybe in the spring, maybe in the summer. Obviously once a year you should change the sphagnum moss, but I'm not going to do that at the moment. Also, there's no smell or anything to the moss, so the moss should be fine for another 6 months at least or so. I also have the Vanda Cherry Blossom, which is a hybrid, I think, between Vanda falcata and I think Ascocenda and Pusilla, if I'm not mistaken. I might be completely wrong, but I'll put a note below. This one has also done really well for me. This one is in a glazed clay pot with my standard coconut husk, perlite, and I think a little bit of sphagnum moss. This one has done really well. I can see inside the medium the roots are going crazy. So again, that is also an option for potting mix. You don't have to do the traditional style. The traditional style looks pretty. Obviously it doesn't look pretty if you have a half the orchid, but I mean it's a pretty style to actually put the orchid in, but this can also look pretty attractive if you use a tall type of pot. And so those are the potting setups I've used. Following the fungal infection, I immediately moved the orchid to the warm grow room where it receives direct sun through a sheer curtain, same as my dendrobiums and my cattleya type, so I give it pretty high cattleya light. But you can see how the other growers are growing their Neofinetias in terms of light requirements. The orchid was doing very well last year up until the point of when it got that rot, so it probably would have flowered end of last year, maybe this year for me, so sadly that didn't happen, but I suspect this keiki will probably flower for me in the next year or two, maybe. The Vanda Cherry Blossom has bloomed for me twice, I think, in the past 2 years, and I'll definitely insert beautiful images of this one in flower. In terms of fertilizer, again, as with all my other orchids, standard fertilizer, weekly for these two. Then for the watering requirements, I would water the one in the coconut husk media less frequently than I would the one in plain sphagnum moss, just because plain sphagnum moss tends to dry out a lot faster. So generally speaking, and I'm saying very generally speaking, the coconut husk will get watered about once a week in the winter, whereas the pure sphagnum moss will get watered at least twice a week in winter, maybe more if the temperatures are pretty high at that time of the year. Then for the summer, this one will get watered at least twice a week, probably more frequently as the summer is pretty hot and dry. And then this one I need to pay quite a bit of attention to because I have to water this at least every 2 days, or at least be spritzing it regularly. You will hear now that the moss is pretty dry and solid and has no bounce to it. Very little bounce to it. I mean, I'm pushing pretty hard on here. So what I will do is I will spritz the moss so that it actually takes on the water and it doesn't have that crunchy sound anymore. And then you can see that the moss becomes very soft and pliable and like foam. So once I've sprayed the moss and that it's absorbed some of the water, then I'll take my normal pump action watering can and I'll spray it thoroughly until it starts to drip into the tray. I do leave a little bit of water standing in the tray. You can see that it actually absorbs the water at this point in time. So that's my basic care for my Neofinetia orchids. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and please subscribe down below if you want to see more content such as this. And don't forget to check out the other channels and look at how they're growing their Neofinetias in their environment and their tips and tricks to these orchids. Thanks so much guys. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.